Hi, I'm Iris Ware Martinez, your clerk of the Circuit Court. My team and I are dedicated to providing the citizens of Cook County and the participants in the judicial system with efficient and transparent services. This program is an extension of our commitment to providing information services that empower you to make the best decisions possible. I hope you find this episode helpful. Thank you for your time.
I'm Robyn Page, Chief Deputy Clerk of the Domestic Violence Division and your host for this edition of Clerk in the Community. Welcome, everyone. I have 10 years of experience working in domestic violence services from the Sheriff's Office to becoming the Chief of the Domestic Violence Division in 2021. The Domestic Violence Division handles actions and proceedings for both civil and criminal orders. The type of protective orders that can be granted in the Domestic Violence Division under the civil area of law are civil no-contact orders arising from the Civil No-Contact Order Act, stalking no-contact orders arising under the Stalking No-Contact Order Act, workplace violence protection orders under the Workplace Violence Prevention Act, firearms restraining orders under the Firearms Restraining Order Act, and lastly, orders of protections arising under the Domestic Violence Act of 1986. The division hears all criminal actions and proceedings involving family and household members as defined in the Act, such as all matters through preliminary hearing or indictment, in which the most serious offense charged is a Class 1, 2, or 3 felony, Class 4 felonies, misdemeanors, aggravated stalking, civil no-contact orders, and stalking no-contact orders. Our office recently opened the Domestic Violence Survivor Center in the Markham Courthouse at 16501 South Kedzie Parkway. The center was created to be a safe haven and to provide resources to survivors. Those resources direct our constituents to various partners which offer legal support and care. We will discuss some of those legal services with a representative of one of our partners, Legal Aid Chicago. Remember, the Office of the Circuit Court of Cook County is the keeper of the records. The office provides information, not services. Yet we partner with different service providers to assist our customers with specialized resources for their different circumstances. Emma McMullen from Legal Aid Chicago is joining us today. She is the supervising attorney of the Children and Families Practice Group of Legal Aid Chicago. Emma, thank you for joining us today. You don't mind if I refer to you as Emma?
Of course.
Okay. All right. So we're going to talk about some different discussions and scenarios regarding domestic violence. Please tell us about your background as an attorney and give us a brief description of the services your office provides.
Yes, I work at Legal Aid Chicago. I've been here for just over 5 years, and I've been here since I graduated law school. I went to Loyola and did their Child Law Fellowship program, which really prepared me for this type of work. And Legal Aid Chicago, within our Children and Families Practice Group, offers a lot of different services to domestic violence survivors. Within the Family Law Practice Group, which is a little bit of a misnomer, we do orders of protection, civil no-contact orders, and stalking no-contact orders.
Okay.
We also do domestic relations cases. So, as you know, parentage and divorces, and often those cases involve domestic violence, and many times they also involve orders of protection, like we'll be talking more about today.
Absolutely. Wonderful. People often think they understand what domestic violence is. Would you define what that means?
Sure. To me, domestic violence really encompasses more than just one incident, more than one type of behavior. It's a pattern of behaviors, and they establish a power and control dynamic between two people in a relationship. I think that this is most often seen, as you know, as physical violence, but it really is not limited to that.
Absolutely.
It can be mental, it can be emotional, it can be financial, intimidation. There's all sorts of things that sort of fall under that umbrella of behaviors, and all of it works together to keep somebody in a position of having less power and being unable to act on their own accord.
Absolutely. Yeah, we see that a lot within our division. Absolutely. So Emma, statistically, women and children are viewed as the predominant victims of abuse. What other groups of individuals might be overlooked when it comes to thinking about victims of abuse?
I think I definitely hear the stereotype, and I know that we find ourselves falling into some pronoun usage to assuming that this is the perfect victim. Really, it does not discriminate. It can happen to anyone. Domestic violence can happen in any type of relationship, really. And I know that you mentioned kids too. It's not just romantic partnerships. It's in families, and I think that really part of the reason that domestic violence is able to be perpetrated is this idea of power and control, but also silence. People who don't feel able to discuss what is going on in their intimate relationships external to that scenario. And I think that really makes partnerships that are not, or that are sort of systemically discouraged or silenced, really a tough spot for people who are experiencing this type of abuse. They may not feel comfortable speaking to larger communities or support systems about their relationship in general. So this is groups like immigrants who are relying on a partner in order to be here and to be safe here. It's groups like the LGBTQ plus community who feel like maybe they can't tell their boss, or they can't tell their friend, or they can't tell their neighbor that they're going through this because they don't know if they're going to be safe in disclosing their scenario or their situation, let alone talking about the abuse. So I think groups that are sort of already discouraged from being honest and open about themselves are places where domestic violence can really, unfortunately, thrive.
Right, because violence doesn't have a gender, a race, an ethnicity, a sexual orientation, or anything like that. Wow. So, Emma, what is an order of protection, and how does it function within the justice system?
An order of protection is a civil order, and I think that orders of protection and protective orders get really kind of confusing to anyone who isn't doing this work every day like you and I are. Protective orders is a broader term which covers things like orders of protection, stalking no contact orders, civil no contact orders, and firearms restraining orders.
Right.
And I think that all of those things are intended to be, initially at least, temporary stopgaps that prevent the abuse from continuing. It allows people to get to a stable and safe environment. It allows people to remove themselves from that immediate threat of harm. And I think that orders of protection in particular are intended for family or dating relationships, and they are meant to protect the petitioner, who is the one asking for the order, from the behavior by the respondent, the person that they're asking for the order against. As I said, of course, as you know, when they're first filed, they are temporary, and then if they are granted, if the orders are granted, and they then continue so that the judge can hear the entire case. Protective orders are not, at least not at the beginning, not permanent, and they are really intended to be sort of a safety mechanism that is employed for a short amount of time until the full case can be heard.
Absolutely. There's a misconception about how quickly an individual can receive an order of protection. Can you elaborate on that process?
Sure. So first of all, the filing for the petition for order of protection it's not super time consuming, but it's not quick. It is a lot of paperwork, and it's important that the judge has all of that information so that they can assess your case and also make sure that if there are protections being put in place, they're protections tailored to what has happened. They're looking at the exact abuse that the petitioner is saying has occurred, and they're making sure that the remedies that they're ordering are in line with what has happened and what might happen in the future. And so that paperwork, it's a lengthy document, and it asks a lot of questions.
Don't we know?
There are statewide approved forms which make it pretty easy to go through line by line and know what it is that the judge is looking for.
Absolutely.
It is not intended to be a secret. Like in the family law courts, for example, there is sort of more creative work in terms of how you might file a case. There's all sorts of things you can include. In a petition for order of protection, it is intended to be straightforward and streamlined, but it is long. And so once that paperwork is filled out, which can be done at the courthouse, it's then given to the judge, and we have to wait for the judge to have time to read it, take a look at it, and then hear the case. As far as I understand, this process can take about a day. You won't really be asked to leave and come back necessarily. It's pretty tight in that way, but it is not just a document that you fill out, turn in, and then get a stamp and are sent on your way.
Right.
And then once that initial order is heard, there are continuances, so 21 days at a time usually, where the court is either trying to find the respondent and get them served, or they're giving the parties time to try to reach an agreement, or maybe go to a mediator for some of the issues at play. So the short answer to your question is that initial piece takes several hours to complete, and then the actual case itself is typically somewhere between 2 and 6 months.
Okay. And you know, that's one thing that we see in the Clerk of the Circuit Court within our division. We see a lot of, people misguided or having a lot of misinformation in regards to the process, the filing process. They think that they can just come in, file an order of protection, and they go in front and see the judge, and the judge is going to grant the order, but they don't understand that it's a whole process and procedure, and there's documents, lengthy documents that they have to fill out before they actually go to court to see the judge. Yes.
And it's important to be, although the paperwork is long, it's important to be accurate and to contain everything that's that is needed so that the appropriate remedies can be granted, the right things can be given to the person who's asking if they're entitled to them. And I think the other thing that you mentioned is this idea that you sort of come to court, you fill out your paperwork, and you're done. And we see sometimes people will call us and say, I have an order of protection. I've been given an order of protection, but they only have that emergency order. And so they're right that they have that initial temporary piece, but the case is still ongoing. And I think that's another misconception, that the first court date is the only court date.
And another thing that I see within our division is sometimes people don't know the difference between a petition only and an actual emergency order. They think that they have an emergency order, but they do not. They have a petition only. So I see that a lot in the courthouse as well.
Definitely agree.
Yeah. So can you tell us how much it costs to file an order of protection?
Yes, it is free to file an order of protection. And even for some of the other pieces that might come with it, there are also fee waivers. So the initial petition is free. It's free to seek that protection. And then if there are other court pieces that end up becoming involved, so for example, if a partnership of two spouses one of the spouses files a petition for order of protection, the other one then files a divorce. While the petition for order of protection is free, there is a fee associated with some of the paperwork in that divorce process, but there are fee waiver applications available as well. And similar to the petition for order of protection, those forms are very straightforward. They're all available online through the state. And so I would encourage people who are able to file that petition for order of protection because there is no fee, but are nervous about proceeding with any other types of litigation, there's fee waivers for that as well.
Emma, where can a person file for an order of protection?
So a petition for order of protection can be filed at 555 West Harrison. At that courthouse, there's both a civil and a criminal division. Within the civil cases, those are going to be filed through the clerk's office sort of on a person's own. They're filling out the paperwork themselves. They're bringing it. It's getting stamped. It's heard by a judge. In the criminal cases, a state's attorney works with them in order to make those requests. And so they'll be, helped through that process by an attorney, and that gets sort of fielded through their criminal case as opposed to a separate proceeding.
Okay, that makes sense.
And then in addition to 555 West Harrison, they can also be filed at the suburban courthouses if someone lives in Cook County but isn't able to come downtown and has a suburban courthouse closer to them.
Sure. And they can also e-file too, correct?
That's correct.
Okay.
They can be e-filed, and a lot of the court proceedings are still being done remotely. And I'll also add that if there's already an ongoing domestic relations case, so parentage or family law, parentage or divorce cases, they can be filed within those cases as well, meaning all heard in that same case by that same judge, as opposed to starting a separate case at 55 West Harrison.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Do you need an attorney to file for an order of protection, Emma?
No, you don't. At the courthouse, there are advocates who can help people out. They may go to that court date with them, or maybe a few more court dates with them. They are not attorneys, and they are not representing them in that matter. It is definitely an area of law where you can represent yourself, both as the petitioner, the person asking, or the respondent, the person who it's filed against. If you decide that you want an attorney at some point in the court proceeding, the judges will often give you time to find one.
Thank you. Emma, where can a person file an order of protection?
So petitions for order of protection can be filed at 555 West Harrison, which is the domestic violence courthouse. There are many advocates there who are willing to help. They help with paperwork. There's also the clerk's office who can help guide you through some of those questions. But in addition to 555 West Harrison, there's also suburban courthouses. So if someone doesn't live in the city of Chicago and is looking to seek these protections, they can go to one of the suburban courthouses. And similarly, those offices also have advocates who can help with that paperwork. And of course, clerk's offices as well, where those papers can be filed, and if there are errors in the paperwork, it can help be corrected.
Sure, thank you. Can a minor get an order of protection?
Minors can file for orders of protection. However, I would also add that if a minor doesn't feel comfortable seeking it on their own, an adult can file it on their behalf.
Okay, sure, thank you. So can you tell me what other service your office provides outside of legal help?
Yes, so as I mentioned, I work at Legal Aid Chicago. We have a bunch of different practice groups that do different types of law, and many of them tie to domestic violence, or at least have some aspect of their work that would handle cases that involve domestic violence. So for example, if somebody is let go from their job or retaliated against at their job because they're missing work due to court dates for the domestic violence case, that is something that our employment group could consider. Okay. If someone is a survivor of domestic violence and they're facing an immigration issue, we have immigration attorneys who work on cases that are specifically tailored to that. We also have a consumer practice group, a housing practice group, a public benefits practice group, and some other projects. And so we have a lot of different areas of law that we do. And within each of those, we also have, or I guess touching on all of those topics, we have a social work team. We're very lucky to have a social work team at Legal Aid Chicago because they are able to connect clients to resources that attorneys typically don't have time to, or really the area of expertise, frankly, to dig in on those issues. So I don't have, admit it to you today, I don't have sort of an encyclopedic knowledge of all the housing resources in the city of Chicago. I sure wish I did, but I don't. But our social work team does. And so when a client has an issue that is coming up as a result of the domestic violence, something like they're facing loss of housing or they're not getting child support, the social work team is very frequently able to connect them with the resources that will be helpful in order to get them through that time.
Okay, thank you for providing that very helpful information. So from your experience in working with survivors, why do some individuals decide to stay with their abuser?
Yes, this does happen, and I think that it is hard to see that happen, especially when they have already reached out for help with the separation. The reality is that oftentimes this pattern of power and control has been established in such a way that it's very difficult, and it's made difficult on purpose for them to leave. Really the biggest space that we see this is the financial piece. And this sort of presents itself in two different ways. First of all, we see it with child support. When the two parties have children or a child together, then when the person has left due to the abuse, they're not getting that financial support for the child. Oftentimes they were sharing a residence before, and so having to take on all of those bills by themselves is very difficult. There is the ability to request child support in an order of protection. However, it's often not heard until the end of the case. It's still sometimes quicker than it might be through a family law case, but it does, it's not an immediate remedy, which makes sense. And so I think that is certainly one piece. And then the other piece is just oftentimes abuse is coupled with financial control. And so with that financial control, the abuser may take the person's wages, or they might put all of the money in a bank account that they don't have access to. So literally being able to leave is difficult if you don't have family or you don't have friends or people that you can rely on to sort of fill that space of physically removing yourself from the home.
Absolutely. What are some indicators if you believe a person is being abused? Like, can you give us some indicators?
Sure.
To look for?
Of course, there's all different kinds of abuse. As we mentioned earlier, physical abuse is really what people think of most often. There's a lot of, especially sort of mid-2000s campaigns with people covering up bruises, and of course that is definitely a way that abuse presents to the public. However, there's also these other pieces of the control, the mental abuse, the verbal abuse, financial abuse. And I think that something to look out for is this idea of isolation. And I think that that's something that isn't, it's not something you might go to a judge for. It's not something where you'd say, my partner doesn't let me see my parents. That alone is something that sort of sounds like not enough, right? It's a behavior, but it's not in and of itself harmful. But I think that that's a sign that people often miss, and it's something that we've talked a little bit about today, how, throughout throughout the pattern of abuse, that piece of it is what makes it really hard to seek help. If an abuser has isolated the survivor from their family members, their friends, maybe made them quit their job because they want them home all the time, it's really hard to get resources. It's really hard to leave because you don't have anyone to rely on at that point.
And that plays back into the wages.
Absolutely, yes.
Okay. Wow. Okay. Anything else?
Yeah, I mean, I think the idea that people are, looking for these physical signs is obviously something people should continue to look out for. Things that are injuries that are unexplained, or injuries with explanations that don't really make a lot of sense. All of those things are certainly things to keep an eye out for. But in addition to that, I think the idea of people explaining that their partner is making them do something or needs them to do something, that is another thing. Of course, I'm not saying that's always abuse by any means, but that's something else to look out for. I do think the reality, though, is that abuse is something that happens in private. Like we said earlier, it doesn't discriminate. It can happen to anyone, all races, all sexual orientations, all genders. There really is no limit on who can be a victim and when. And so I think that it so often happens in private that there are signs, but by the time you're seeing something, it's often already become such a pattern of power and control within the relationship that it's going to be hard to just kind of confront on that one instance because so much is already built up behind the scenes.
Absolutely. Yeah, I have a cousin who actually, same thing, her husband moved her to another state and she was isolated, away from her family. All of her family was here, so I do understand that, and it's difficult, especially when money is surrounding that. Absolutely. Do you have a success story that you don't mind sharing with us?
Yeah, I think that really, our clients who come to us are having a difficult time navigating a court system and also navigating it against someone who has been harmful to them in the past. Okay. And I think that something that is really helpful for us to see and what we would consider a success is when we're able to work out resolutions in advance of the hearing.
Sure.
When having sort of a third party, so either me or a lawyer from my office or even a lawyer on the other side, being able to sort of level out the conflict. And something that I love and has been a huge success in our work is that the Domestic Violence Courthouse has a mediation program for child-related matters.
Yes.
And I think some of my biggest success stories are ones that have parenting plans put in place, or at least some guidelines for those interactions by the mediator's office. Stephanie and Sarah are amazing. And when they are able to work with the parties to get buy-in from both sides, to help everyone understand that, yes, the two of you have decided to not be together for good reason, but you have to co-parent. There is no way to not co-parent. Right. And being able to put those guardrails in place while the sort of conflict between the parties dissipates, or is at least put to the side, and the kids get to be the center. The kids are still getting to see both parents. They're still getting love from both parents. Those are cases that I think are really the biggest successes. And being able to work with the resources at the courthouse and seeing the judges be happy for these parties who again, like, they don't want to be together, but they've managed to work something out for the kids. Yes. As I mentioned, my background in sort of education is really in child-focused issues, and so being able to do this work and support survivors, but also make sure that the kids who maybe are uninvolved in the abuse itself are safe and happy and being supported throughout, once the case closes, is really my biggest success.
Wow, that's awesome. Thank you so much for that. Can you tell me what inspires you to do the work that you do on a daily basis?
So I've wanted to be a lawyer since I saw Legally Blonde when I was about 9 years old.
I love Legally Blonde.
As you can tell. But I think that in college I learned about developmental psychology and how the court systems hadn't really caught up to the way that we know that kids think. And so that is really what made me pursue this area of law. And then once I was at Loyola and learning about child law itself, I learned how much children are benefited by strong families who are able to access resources, who are able to access justice, whether it's through the courthouse or through some other system, and really doing their best to keep families together. And so that work is really my passion, and I think that supporting survivors of domestic violence goes a long way to keeping families and children safe and protected.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for the work that you do. Thank you for being here, sharing your success stories, what inspires you, and answering our questions and providing information. Thank you to you and your team at Legal Aid Chicago. Thank you so much.
Yes,
It was
thank
nice
you.
talking
This was
to
a great
you.
conversation.
Absolutely. The Clerk of the Circuit Court of Cook County provides the participants in the judicial system with efficient and transparent services. This program is a means to that end. Remember, you can always find the information you need to navigate the many divisions, districts, and resources of our office by visiting our website at cookcountyclerkofcourt.org or by calling 312-603-5030 and speak to one of our clerks at the Customer Service Center. And that does it for this episode of Clerk in the Community. I'm Robyn Page, Chief Deputy Clerk of the Domestic Violence Division. Thanks for watching, everyone.